index maps and other things like that. So it helped us along that way to kind of transition. With it also, it helped users because with that single PDF, contractors, reviewers, you're panning through that model PDF. You're zooming in, you're zooming out. Things that you'll do in a model. So you're using that as your stepping stone to basically migrate people into the workflow. If you just jump right into a model, they're not going to know how to do anything. They're going to be used to flipping through those pages. You got to transition. So we use this as a transition to that model. So with that project, we also ran into some issues with that ground confidence level. You know, it's important to have it, but the data is only as good as the collection. We actually had a survey done for this one ahead of time that was just traditional mill and fill. In our DOT, that usually means no sections, no profiles. Sometimes they don't even do vertical. It's just a horizontal just to give them something to look at, basically. That actually caused a big problem because we weren't talking to our surveyor. That group wasn't talking to them and telling them, hey, I'm now going from this mill and fill project over to a model. They had to go back out and get vertical on that data, check that levels, things like that. The other thing was we wanted more density to the survey. You know, you think about a survey out there, a lot of times, you know, traditionally today, you might be doing 25-foot intervals, 50-foot intervals, something like that. Well, you miss everything in between. So your model's not catching all that data in between those places. So we also took and said, okay, let's densify this more, let's get more shots. So we took and said, okay, let's go and do LiDAR for hard surfaces, traditional for outside, combine those. Problem was, even doing that, we found another issue. There was no standards given to our consultants. Most of our consultants were relying on standards they use for land development, other things. They weren't following our feature codes. They weren't doing stuff the way our internal surveyors did. That started to create problems because we were getting shots on, say, guide rail, but it was the back of the post instead of the front of the elements, or they were shooting paint lines instead of breaks and shoulders, things like that. Information that they just didn't have, and we didn't realize they didn't have. We weren't communicating that stuff. And communication through this whole process is really the key. You've got to talk. If you don't communicate and you don't set those standards, it's going to fail. And again, this is just something we're using to kind of show some of this stuff. Because even point cloud data, if somebody tries to put line work to it, I don't want a paint line. I want the actual break. If I'm modeling, I'm probably going to try to use that break as a reference. Or if I'm checking slopes on existing projects, I need it in the right place. You can't have a good digital model without good data. So you need to really investigate your surveys and make sure your organization is looking at it. The other thing is scope. We're just talking about that with the mill and fill. We actually, in this process, didn't catch that mistake with the vertical till it was already out to bid. It went out with the vertical issue. It was off 6 inches from one end of the project to the other. And it was a small intersection. The designer wasn't aware he needed to look at that data. He was relying on the survey unit to have done it correctly first. He wasn't talking to him. He was a new hire, younger generation, just started. He didn't know the work. So making sure you have that training, that background, that's going to lead into that. With that, we think about scope change today. A lot of times it's limits of work or type of project. But you may shorten a project, but do you have the right data? So think about those scope changes if you're going from, say, something that's not a model to a model. That's something we really want. Training. So we know what we need to train. We know we need end conditions. We know we need point controls. We know quarters need that stuff to be corrected to build those models. But you've got to think about your users too. You're going to have users that some may be really willing to ask questions, reach out, use the data that's out there, the documents, stuff like that. But there's others that think they know what they're going to do. They know what, oh yeah, I've got this down pat. I don't need your assistance. So you really don't know what to teach them because they're not talking. So again, back to communication. The other thing you run into is we had 11 different districts, all doing their own thing. So you have those different workflows, different products. We had to standardize that. And we had to do that while transitioning from a planned deliverable to a model. So while you're doing that, you're thinking, okay, what do I have to produce? What do I have to show? How do I handle both aspects? How do I bring up current production to some of these needs and get this standardization in there while moving towards that digital delivery path? Because that's a big challenge. I mean, we're all probably going through that right now. But you have to think about that. So to address that, we started a model standards movement. We started to take and develop things so that we could say, okay, plans production is not what we're following. We're going to move to this model. We're going to have it that the model data, the levels, you know, the stuff that's in that model you're developing is what's going to be used for model. But if you're still doing current production, it's going to be used for that production as well. So we're letting the model standards drive that. The levels, the line styles, the fonts, all that stuff is now coming from one centralized location where prior to this initiative, we had 5 different manuals that the data came from. We had to centralize that, we had to standardize it. If you don't standardize, the contractors, the consultants, they're all doing their own thing. If that doesn't work, you have to get that deliverable that matches from no matter who's producing. Whether it's internal, external, it has to match. It has to be followed. So you have to start thinking about how you're going to enforce it too. And that enforcement doesn't just land with your CAD groups and stuff like that. You also have to have management enforcing, hey, yeah, we're going to follow this standard. So it can't be these districts all doing their own things anymore. It has to be, hey, we're all going to accept this. We're going to start moving this way. We're going to follow it. We're going to move forward on this path. With that, it meant we had to learn. And one of the things that we learned off the first pilot was we didn't necessarily do the best job reviewing it. We looked at the documents provided, the plans, the quantities, that type of stuff, but we didn't necessarily review it the way we needed to review it. So prior to the next pilot we did, we actually initiated what's called a model integrity review. So with that process, the model is taken 4 weeks prior to it being let or advertised, put out there all, it has to go through this integrity review. We have to look at it. We have to go through all the steps, check to make sure those end conditions match up, that we don't have different, names on one template to the next, all those things that make it a good model. But how do you check that? Because you have limited resources that have the knowledge of it. So we had to really start thinking about how to review, how to go through that process. So evaluating that is important, and the timing of that's important. The other challenge is you think about software you're going to implement, including review software. Our case, we didn't have cloud approval yet. So we ended up getting to the point where we were ready to advertise, and we didn't have the use of cloud available. So we still had this hybrid deliverables, we still had that stuff. We had to do save views on cross sections. We didn't want to do that initially. We ended up backtracking and having to do that for the first one because we didn't have that cloud approval and it was taking so long to get through our organization. So if you're going to try to do something, you need to make sure you've got enough time ahead of time that software's ready at the point of advertising and stuff like that. Because of that, we used a plan B. Our plan B, unfortunately, was very CAD oriented. Management's never used CAD. How do we get them to use this? How do we teach it? It took more time. So that time took away from other things because we're trying to teach something that really was an antiquated way to review a model. Once we got through that, we were able to, for the next 3 pilots that we've now done, get that cloud approval, use the iTwins and design review and that stuff. So it's gotten better. But there's hiccups that come along the way. There's changes that happen, and we have to adjust and kind of go through those changes. Our field staff, they had iPads, but they were small. It was hard to look at things. So we went with an iPad Pro. It gave them more screen to look at. However, giving them that didn't just solve the problem. I mean, we had the Synchro Field app, but not everything we needed was there yet. We could look at sections, we could, do some measurements, but we know in construction we need offsets and elevations. They weren't there. They didn't exist yet. It was something that became cumbersome for the first pilot to use because it didn't have that functionality. And actually going into the second pilot, we ran into the issue of they need that exact data. One of our inspectors, he actually took 5 hours typing into a spreadsheet to get that information to take out with him on the project because he didn't know how to get it out of the software. There wasn't the ability. After we heard that, we said, did you think to ask design if they could have given you that data in an easier way? Which we could have. Open roads, we could have simply printed a report. Here you go, here's the cross-section information. So make sure with those construction inspectors, you're engaging them. One thing they did to help with that is we put a partnering item in all of our projects after that because that's the only option we have. We don't do CMD or CMDC in our organization. So that was our only way to engage them and pay them for the time that they would talk and come to the table in some of these pilots. And we wanted to engage because we wanted their feedback. We wanted to know, hey, what do you want to do? How do you want to use this? How can we help you? The other thing is the Synchro Field app, both contractors on our first 2 pilots chose to use it alongside us. So they were learning it with us. That actually was kind of nice because we got to hear what they thought too. As-built surveys. First pilot, we did a static LiDAR scan afterwards, trying to capture that information, see how well they did. We did it internally. Our surveyors are used to LiDAR with traditional, but they're picking up that roadway because we weren't concerned about the stuff outside the roadway. They had to rethink that. They forgot about the whole line of sight problem with LiDAR. We got that survey back and wait, we've got holes here. They had set up on the low side of the super. So they didn't capture that fill slope on the downside. So you've got to, some of the older workflows have to be rethought, even when we go into that aspect. And the other thing is, when's the right time to do it? Do we wait to the end in case there is an issue that we have to address it? Or maybe you have, like in our organization, a semifinal ahead of time. Do we do it ahead of that so that you can look at the model and say, hey, we still have an issue. Can you address it before they take and demobilize? And if you have a change, how do you handle it? That's something we're still kind of working through. What do we use to do that? Do we send them back out and pay them extra to mobilize and say, hey, you still have quantity for this? What's the avenue to do that? Those are some things that we're still kind of working through, but we ran into that issue on this project. They didn't communicate with design, and what we found from that survey was they removed the ditch. Removing a ditch wasn't hydraulically needed. Basically, the designer put it in because there was a ditch there before. Construction didn't think about that and took the back point of the ditch and moved it straight up. Didn't follow the back slope, just moved it straight up. Well, the problem with that is it had another constant. Design had actually held that back slope for sight distance. So now you've got a foot and a half material that wasn't removed where that swale was. That's a problem. We catch that in the asphalt. Thing was, luckily, the intersection was at a spew. That moved us 3 feet closer because of the way we calculated. They ended up excavating just enough that it met sight distance. However, the image there, the grass, is 18 inches higher than what that excavation was 2 weeks after the project was completed. So then we had the same problem as before, basically. Luckily, it's in an area where it's a church and they mow the bank and they're maintaining. But that's something we didn't anticipate construction doing something like this and not talking, because we kept saying you need to relay the information back to design and big changes. They didn't do it. So communication, as you've heard me say many times, is very important through this process. I'm going to turn it over to John Reese now.
So we're going to change gears a little bit right now and have a little participation from the audience. Listening to Scott's talk, just what do you think the primary issues that he covered today were? What do you, if you categorize them, what would you say the top issue that he had is? Communication? Okay. Transitioning? Okay. So you collected that information as he talked, So what we have to do is we have to figure out how we're going to collect information when we're looking for lessons learned. Where are we going to extract that data from? And you can think about more than just that. It needs to be organized, because this data is going to be used for more than just lessons learned. It's going to be, that's your project information. That's your project data set that documents how and when it's done. So organize it with project type, size, cost, duration. You can add it. Just put some organization to it. Categorize the information that's coming in. And then make sure that you record both the good and the bad, because we don't want to just say, well, we found 20 issues. Well, yeah, but did anything go well? What are the wins? Did you have any wins, or was this just a total flop? You have any issues? So when you do that, you can, if you record the good, you can have the, recognize, rectify, and replicate. So you can say, well, we're going to push this on. These are your things that we not push it on to the next one. So the next thing is storing. Once you have this data, once you have these minute counts, these after-action reviews, these meetings with the design team, contractor, then you need to make sure that that storage system that you're going to put this in is going to be searchable. And it needs to be part of your collection system so that you're not moving your information from one place and I'm going to put it in one note, but then I'm also going to transfer that into another system that's going to be backed up on our system, and then I can possibly search that. Or if you're using a database that you're setting all this in, you got to set it into that. You need to make sure that you've got a dense, easy to operate storage system that is part of your collection. Easy access. Access to anyone needs it based on looking it up. I know I'm probably dating myself, but wikis used to be a big thing. I don't know if any of you use wikis right now, but I think they're still a big thing. They're just usable. They're out there, they're on the web. You have to maintain them. You have to have the system to maintain them. Something like that allows you to go through, do word searches, find those primary causes, look for a type of project to see if there's any like instances of those projects. And that would be search. So the next thing you want to do is go into your analysis. You can focus on your keywords at that point because you have a searchable database of issues. You can extract those out and put those into the issue. And what are we looking for on that is the reactive part of this is a root cause analysis. We want to be able to go down into the roots of what just happened. Why did it happen? You know, how can we keep it from happening again? And then you can't just stay at the top of the root. You found the root, but that root has a bottom. That root may go deeper than you think. You need to go to it. But we don't want to stay on our root cause because that's a reactive position. We want to go on to the next situation of a proactive. And we'd like to stay in proactive. Because this allows us to look at trend analysis and risk assessment of what we're doing. We're all familiar with that. That's something that we do a lot. So we look at what are the potential risks from the data set that we have. What could be a risk and how are we going to mitigate those from happening from now on? And that's how you implement your next move in training and your next move in standards, your whatever it is that you identify. And that keeps you from it kind of future-proofs because if you're looking ahead, you know, maybe our software didn't have enough application to it. We can work with the vendors to get more. We can see where our people in the field are looking for data and understand that, what they need and their needs are. So that's what we have. We have just a little bit of time for questions.
And sorry, but John doesn't have his name in this because he forgot to switch it from Alan to him. So questions. And I will say there is a lot more to still come, a lot more to still learn. But the big thing is expect change, expect issues, expect things that you don't even think are going to come at you. Oh, we've been doing this for 20 years. It should be fine. That's not the case. Things are going to pop up that you do not expect.
What information were your contractors leaning more towards the model versus more towards the role plan? Like, were they pulling grades from models or?
So the first one, they were more looking at the grades. The second project, they were using AMG and rovers and that stuff. But it had more earthwork than the first one, because the first one was more or less just cutting the bank back. In reality, we probably wouldn't, on a normal project, model that one, because it was very limited cut. It was one slope. They probably could have done it with just some quantity and some details in reality. But we're trying to move towards that, you know, if it's got earthwork, it's model. But there is going to be limitations on where we'll probably use it. But I would say one was great, one was actually model. So internally, after these lessons were learned, we took them to, we have in our organization, each district has a DE and an AE of the different disciplines, so maintenance, construction. This information all went to them. We said, hey, this is stuff that isn't just necessarily digital delivery issues. This is stuff that we got to address in general. So we approached it in that manner. We gave a presentation, showed them the project data, we showed them the projects, we talked through it, tried to come up with some solutions. Survey-wise, we're trying to get a internal meeting set up right now. We're hoping to have that later, either later this year or early spring, where design and survey come together in a room and talk out all this stuff. Because in reality, survey doesn't really understand what all we need. And in some aspects, we need to also talk to them like, hey, when should we talk to you about changes here, or how should we address things? Or what's a better way to check the data? One thing I didn't mention about survey is one thing we have done since then too is we're doing a check on the surveys. So now we're actually going out and not only checking the surveys for accuracy, we're taking the model times and checking the model times. So we're taking what the elevation should be and checking it at that station in the field to make sure that's truly the elevation. So we're doing that right before the end of the project as a way to kind of be a spot check and say, okay, yeah, we don't have a vertical issue, this is correct. Everything's tying in, everything's matching with what we have in that survey for the project. So that was one thing that came out of those meetings, is we need a better way to check things. The other thing was someone said, really, this is happening? Changes like this have happened? I thought we had better communication. So it kind of opened up their eyes to, wow, I guess we need to start talking a little more internally than we do today. So it prompted a lot of conversation since then.
So communication is part of that easy access, making it available to everyone, and you can put that out in a newsletter and say lessons learned for project A, lessons learned for project B, available. Here's your link. And that gives more than just leadership passing along. It makes it available to the entire group.
And we also, we have taken every pilot since then, and all these lessons, all these things, we go through them at the beginning of each of those pilots. So each of them are hearing all these lessons as well, and we're saying, okay, because of this, this is why you're doing this now. This is what has changed because this problem came up with the other. So we had to implement some new things. That, we couldn't say up front, hey, this is what's going to be a problem. We had to have those failures to say, okay, we need to address this.
So before we potentially take any additional questions, the official time is up. So I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation. So, we do have a 15-minute break between sessions if you do want to ask any additional questions on your own. But thank you very much for your attendance.